Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rise of Humanist Chaplain event. I'm going to introduce Joshua Berg here. He's going to do an opening invocation, and then we're going to get our event started.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joshua Berg, and we will begin by acknowledging our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We recognize that these peoples were forcibly removed from their homelands, and we take this opportunity to acknowledge the generations that have gone before, as well as the present-day Gabrielino Tongva people. With humility, we recognize and respect all Indigenous peoples, their histories, and their ties to the land. And we also recognize the Chumash, the Tatavayan, the Serrano, the Cahuilla, the Juaneño, and the Luiseño people for the land that USC occupies around Southern California. We pay respects to their past and present. Let this acknowledgement serve as an ongoing reminder of the original inhabitants where you reside. By offering this land acknowledgement, we pledge ourselves to justice and repair, both with the land and its people. And I call you to be present today and each moment. Present in awe of tremendous privilege and sacrifice, freedom and struggle, ignorance and knowledge, fear and love, and the complex, non-binary existential continuum that spans the spaces between and beyond. Today, I invoke our ability and our responsibility to learn from each other, to meet on deferential ground with humility, and to strive to live through empathy, that compassion for our world and all who live upon it may always be our guide. I conclude, as we began, by invoking courage to speak our truths, according to the words of the great Audre Lorde, who wrote in her poem, A Litany for Survival, "It is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive."
Thank you. If you online, tell me if this sounds a little bit better. We're trying two mics there. This is one mic. My name is Evan Clark. I want to welcome you to today's event. I am the executive director of an organization called Atheists United. We've been here in Los Angeles since 1982, providing community and organizing atheists for political advocacy. We made a decision last year after, frankly, struggled through the pandemic. We used to host monthly speaker events every month since 1982. And last year, that just wasn't working. People aren't turning out for in-person events the way they used to, and so we wanted to shake up the model. We thought, let's go quality over quantity. And so we decided to partner with USC, Office of Religious Life. We decided to bring in some national partners, which I'll talk about in a second. And we decided, let's take on a topic that really needs some attention, that has not gotten the platforming that it needs, and to talk about how groundbreaking this current moment is in a space that is traditionally religious, chaplaincy. So today's event, we're extremely thrilled by. I had a few connections with a few of these people. Some of them are the first chaplains ever to hold their positions in North America in that industry. And it's going to be a great event. So I'm going to get out of the way and do the tech booth the whole time, but I want to introduce you to the host of today's event, the second host of today's event, and the moderator for today's event. It's the Assistant Dean of Religious Life for University of Southern California's Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, Vanessa Gomez Brake. Yes.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you all for being here. I also will go micless because this classroom is so high tech. I think everyone can hear us, but if at any point I go too quiet, please just give me a thumbs up or something like that in the live audience here. So on behalf of the University of Southern California, I'm delighted to welcome you all to campus and to our Zoom land. Greetings for everyone who's Zooming or watching us on live stream. So the USC Office of Religious and Spiritual Life is really happy to be partnering with Atheists United for what I think is a historic event. The first gathering of these humanist chaplains from across Canada and the US to highlight their professional works as humanists in the military, in hospitals, at universities and prison settings. Never have I seen a panel quite like this. USC is a leading private research university commonly known as the Hollywood School. And perhaps you know a few other names as well. But we're also a global center for the arts, for international business, and creative technologies, giving way to groundbreaking innovations that solve the world's toughest problems. As such, the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life works to push the boundaries of chaplaincy and spiritual care as well. Today, our event will explore how humanists not only are reshaping the chaplain profession, but are in turn reshaping humanist ideas about the field. It is an honor for USC to host this event, as well as to introduce our next speaker, someone who has truly spearheaded humanist chaplaincy in a university setting. And of course, I'm speaking of no other than Greg Epstein, who is a humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, and he has prepared a very special opening message for us today. So let us listen in now.
Hi, everybody.
One second, we're gonna get the audio right.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to an amazing event. My name is Greg Epstein. I work as the Humanist Chaplain at Harvard and MIT. And how cool is that to be able to introduce my chaplaincies at an event filled with humanist chaplains and humanist chaplaincies and maybe future humanist chaplains and just fans and appreciators of humanist chaplaincy. That is not something to take for granted. And frankly, when I began my own career as a humanist chaplain at Harvard almost 20 years ago, this was it. This was the dream, that we could have an event just like this one in my lifetime, where we would have humanists in chaplaincy roles in hospitals, in the military, in prisons, at universities, and wherever people were needed to do this work of caring and offering community and offering support from a place of meaning and purpose in a secular way. I can't believe we're finally here, but it's thanks to you and to the people who are going to follow us. I want to also thank everybody who brought this event together. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, the USC Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, for all of your support, and all the co-sponsors and the speakers. You're doing amazing work. And I also want to thank and bring our attention to two of the people that I think without whom none of us could be here doing an event like this. These are two men who were both mentors of mine. They were both born right around 1929, right as the stock market was crashing into the worst depression in modern times economically, and that culminated in the most devastating and destructive war in human history. That was their youth. The first was Tom Ferrick, who was the first humanist chaplain at Harvard. He was also the first humanist chaplain at any university in the world and the first humanist chaplain in any role in North America. Tom was orphaned at a very early age. Both of his parents died of the tuberculosis plague, and he was raised in a Catholic orphanage type setting. He wanted to be a priest because that was all he ever knew. And as a young priest, he lost his faith. He discovered his sexuality as a gay man, and he was so fortunate, he felt, to be able to build a career like this one as one of our pioneers in this field. The second is Sherwin Wine, who was known as Rabbi Sherwin Wine to me. He was born in the Detroit area to a family that had gone there escaping what became the Holocaust. He loved his community, and so he became a Reformed rabbi, even though he knew he was an atheist and a humanist. And before he became one of the great humanist leaders ever, he was a chaplain in the Korean War, and he would go from base to base, making sure that his Jewish soldiers had kosher salamis, because that made them feel at home. And humanists want to make people feel at home in the world. And that's what you're doing. It's really hard work. It's been quite hard for me at times, to be honest with you. There were a lot of times where I felt like not only my career, but our entire field could come to a crashing halt. But we're here, and we're getting more diverse by the day. And you're doing amazing, inspiring work. And I just couldn't be more grateful to be associated with you, to see this profession grow and thrive. And we're in this together. Let's grow together. Thank you again. Have a wonderful event, and thanks for including me in it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to an amazing event.
All right. That was such a special message from Greg Epstein. And many thanks to him and for the Harvard and MIT Humanist Chaplaincy for co-sponsoring today's event. I first met Greg in 2009. I was a young adult. I attended an interfaith conference in Chicago. And although I had been a humanist for several years, I had no idea that humanist chaplains existed. And so happening into a session that he was leading because he had just written his book, Good Without God, I think at that time, my mind was open to the possibilities of what leadership could look like for humanists. And many years later, I've been working in higher ed for a long time. I was working at Stanford for several years at Stanford Memorial Church and their Interfaith Center. But you know what? It wasn't until USC hired me that we had someone in the role of Associate Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life. To this day, I am one of the few, I'm the first and one of the few to be a chief leader in religious and spiritual life at any American university. The good news is I didn't even introduce Anthony Cruz, who is working our Zoom room and the chat. He is also a humanist chaplain at Tufts University for the last few years. And because he's based on the East Coast, he is helping us with the Zoom space, but he is also my colleague in this work in the university setting. As you might imagine, many other chaplains have to fundraise for their own organizations just so that they can do the work on campuses, whereas Anthony and I are employed by our universities and really happy to provide spiritual care and religious leadership for all students. So, as I was thinking, Greg, I also want to put a shout out to Humanist Canada, as well as the Humanist Society for being our other co-sponsors who really made it possible for some of these folks to be in the room today and for all of us just to really enjoy this subject matter. So before we get started, I wanted to offer just a bit more orientation to what you can expect today. We're going to do our best at this hybrid event, engaging all in attendance, as well as an opportunity to demonstrate what it is chaplains do. Our panelists will share insights from their work. Earlier, you heard from Chaplain Joshua Berg, who offered a secular invocation to open us up. And later on, Srishti will engage the audience in an interactive activity so you get a sense of what we do and not just listen to what we do. I hope you'll keep that chat box lively up there because we can see everything you're typing. And if you haven't already, let us know where you're zooming in from, because it really is a delight to see who's calling in. Also, at the end of our panel discussion, we'll have 20 minutes for Q&A. So please do prepare a question. The roomers, that's you, can submit a question, which I will then present to the panel. And our Zoomers can drop your questions in the chat at any time, and then we'll give voice to as many of those questions as possible in that 20-minute period. Lastly, I invite everyone in attendance to attend a post-event happy hour. Chaplain Anthony Cruz Pantejos is guiding our Zoom conversation, and they will hang out after the main event to guide conviviality for all our online participants. And so, yes, you can chat with a chaplain afterwards. Those of us here at USC, we invite you to cross the street right this way to grab a drink and some snacks with us at Rockin' Riley's. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists who've been sitting here quietly, thank you, who, after I introduce them, will have a chance to tell a bit more about themselves. So immediately to my left, we have Marie-Claire Khadij, a military chaplain with the Canadian Armed Forces, currently stationed in New Brunswick, Canada. Marie-Claire has been serving as a military chaplain since 2017 and became the first humanist chaplain in the Canadian Armed Forces in May of just last year. Her aim is to continue to grow the number of humanist chaplains in the CAF to ensure that all members, including humanists, agnostics, atheists, and all with secular worldviews, are represented and can access services specific to their values. She is also a women's rights advocate and strives to be an ally to minorities, especially to us LGBTQIA+ and communities of color. So let's hear it for Marie-Claire. It's worth noting that to this day, we do not have a humanist military chaplain in the US military. And right next to her, we have Elisa Rosoff, a prison chaplain at the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women. She also offers re-entry chaplaincy for those transitioning from life in jail or prison to life in the community at Arise Collective's Transitional Housing Program. She is the first humanist chaplain that I've met working in this particular setting and may very well be one of the first in US history. She is certainly blazing a trail for humanists in North Carolina. Previously, Elisa was a hospital chaplain specializing in palliative care and pediatrics. She has provided spiritual care and or emotional care in both Spanish and English in Washington, DC, New York City, and North Carolina. Let's hear it for Elisa. I think I forgot to mention Marie-Claire is also a multilingualist, which I think many of our panelists are, which is an amazing way to bring comfort to those who are seeking care. Next up, we have Chaplain Srishti Hukku, currently serves as a humanist chaplain at the University of Ottawa, based in Ontario, Canada. She is also a humanist officiant. As a Kashmiri Canadian, Srishti also broke down barriers when she became the first racialized accredited humanist chaplain in all of Canada. Srishti is passionate about creating spaces that maximize human potential by leveraging a trauma-informed, anti-oppressive, healing-centered lens. And she brings all that energy to her advocacy work for 2S LGBTQIA+ issues, as well as issues of immigration, integration, and diversity for disability and neurodiversity. Let's hear it for Srishti. And of course, by now, we all know Chaplain Joshua Berg, who is in his second year as a chaplain resident at Children's Hospital here in sunny Los Angeles. He is Jewish, he is a humanist, and he is a Unitarian Universalist. As a chaplain, a celebrant, and ordained UU minister, Chaplain Berg has experience in a variety of contexts, from leading congregational services and presiding over ceremonies to providing spiritual care at the bedside. He is also a member of the Humanist Society's Board of Directors and a contributor to the Humanist magazine. Let's give it up for Chaplain Berg. All right, at this point, we're gonna share some slides while our colleagues tell us a bit more about themselves. Each of them has prepared an image to share along with their storytelling. And the prompt that we have for each of you is this. Please share with us a meaningful moment from your journey with Humanist Chaplaincy.
Yes, so thanks for having me, everyone. It's quite a privilege. As it was shared before, I'm the first military humanist chaplain in Canada, and as far as I know of the Americas, actually. But I hope that I won't be the only one for long. I was asked today to share with you an image that kind of represents, what chaplaincy is to me. This is a picture of when I was deployed in Latvia a few years back. And this is a picture I took from being in one of the trenches during an exercise. The reason I chose this picture is because to me, it really speaks to what we do as military chaplains. We're there on the ground with the members to care for them, no matter what they're going through. And that's very special. It's such a privilege to be able to do that with members. And we are asked to share meaningful moments, but there are so many, right? And honestly, most of them are just so simple. Most of them are just when you were able to be there for a person during a rough time, and afterwards they just say thank you. And that's why to me this work is so important, just so that no one's alone going through a rough time while being a military member. That's for me.
Well, I have two slides. On this first one, I wanted to show you the attire that I might be wearing inside the prison. There's no uniform for me at the women's prison, but I do choose to wear a vest with my name on it, similar to officers, captains, and lieutenants for some degree of authority. And I come with pastoral authority. And so I wear my rainbow lanyard as a symbol of allyship, which is very rare in the prison setting to see. And then on the other side is me providing a humanist invocation at our big fundraiser called A Cause for Celebration. And so historically, Arise Collective, who I work for, was begun by Presbyterian women. And so the fact that over the years it became Interfaith Prison Ministry for Women and now Arise Collective, that rebranding, I think, shows our commitment to justice, equity, etc. And on the next slide, one of the happiest moments of this past year, this is Shirley. And Shirley is now a free woman. But when this picture was taken, we were at Duke University's chapel, and Shirley had taken 6 Duke Divinity Prison Partnership theology classes while incarcerated. And on this day, she was granted access to leave prison, wear regular clothes, and receive her certificate with all the Duke Divinity graduates. And so that's just a day in the life with reentry and prison chaplaincy. And she is now in the women's reentry program that I work for. So it's been phenomenal to be there as that bridge throughout her transition.
I guess it's me. Excuse me. So I am a chaplain resident at Children's Hospital, as you know. And I chose these pictures because it sort of represents my personality and how I approach chaplaincy work, especially in a pediatric setting. I use a lot of humor. This was my Halloween costume on the right. And I took the PPE, which is the personal protection gear, the mask and the gown and everything, and turned it into a superhero chaplain. And if you can see, it says emotional support human. Please don't pet me, I'm working. But sort of represented me as a chaplain. It's about, for me, relationship building. As MC said, it's about being the person who has no agenda other than to be with someone during a difficult time. And I like to break down as many barriers as I can going into the room where it's appropriate in order to build a trust and create a relationship where I can support someone. And I use humor for that. It's a strong tool, so I have to wield it delicately because oftentimes it can be inappropriate. And many times it's not appropriate at all. The second picture is of, I'm the humanist chaplain and I wanted you to meet the post-humanist chaplain. That is, I'm kidding, he's not a chaplain. Or they, I'm not sure the pronouns. But this is Moxie. We have 2 Moxies in the hospital, and they deliver prescriptions around the hospital. They deliver medicine, so staff don't have to be running around getting things. But it's something like that where I would, introduce Moxie to a child or something to sort of make a connection, rather than some scary guy with a beard coming into the room, wearing a gown, maybe another doctor. Just one way to build a connection. There's one more slide. I believe there it is. So this is my canine spiritual assessment chart. They have the faces of pain chart in the hospital from the smiley face to the frowning face, where they ask children how much pain they're feeling. So I figured I would create something that they can relate to in the hospital. And so for parents, family members, as well as children, this is another way to break through the threshold, if you will, into a space that's very scary and very cold and create, if you'll excuse the phrase, a more sacred space that is relational, where I can then be trusted to support people in probably some of the most difficult times that they will experience in their lives. So I'll end with that.
So, wow, I am so grateful to be here. I can't believe I'm back in California. It is absolutely amazing to be here in person with all of you. I picked a few pictures because I couldn't choose as well. So I wanted to showcase, I think, a few important moments that have brought me to this point. As you can see on the left there, that's lovely dorky photo of 10-year-old Srishti growing up in Northern California in the Bay Area. And I think that's one of the most pivotal moments from an academic journey for me, where I stood in front of the entire school and there was an astronaut next to me talking about space and the potentiality of human beings. And so as Vanessa shared, I continue to be a doctoral student at the university, so have yet to leave school. So I think that is a really important moment that showcases why this work is so important to me. And then moving on, last year, Humanist Canada was able to, moving on to the photo on the right, that is me enthusiastically at our Pride Parade in Ottawa last year. So Humanist Canada was present for the first time in the National Capital Region, and in part because we have expanded in terms of spiritual leadership in the community, specifically at the university. So really grateful to the leadership team that has been part of making this possible. Thanks everyone who's watching from Canada. And I wanted to showcase that my expertise is really in sexual and reproductive health. And so as someone who's on campus, I too am joining people at very pivotal moments in terms of their life journey. Oftentimes folks are leaving home for the first time. They're exploring sex and trying to come to terms with their gender identity and sexuality. There are also, unfortunately, experiences of sexual violence on campus and trying to reckon with an academic workload while doing that. As you can imagine, unintended pregnancy. So because of my specialty, because I have been on campus for a number of years focused on sexual and reproductive health, I think I disproportionately get those kinds of requests, which I'm really grateful to be a part of that conversation. But just to give you a flavor, there are of course folks who are just new in town, lonely, haven't had a chance to meet anybody yet, struggling with sort of the pressures of going from, a high school level expectations academically to then university level to the independence that, you know, you have to manage your own time, your own courses, etc. So I'm really, really thrilled to be able to provide those services on campus. I also wanted to showcase the next photo. So that is my OG grandfather, who died about 2.5 weeks ago. So I wanted to highlight that because not only have I had the opportunity to be of service as a humanist chaplain, but I've relied on folks, including those on this panel, thank you, MC, and other humanist chaplains in Canada and my humanist community as part of this grieving process. So I think it's important to recognize that, you know, just because we are in leadership roles doesn't mean that we're here to provide all of the answers, unlike some of our doctrinal colleagues, that we also have room to be vulnerable and then rely on our community of peers. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to highlight a few of those moments. Thank you. And so I'm going to actually get up now and hopefully not torture too many of you introverts with this interactive activity. I see you, you're in the audience. So I think recognizing, you know, the beauty of life and, you know, how little time we do have on this planet, I wanted to incorporate an interactive event, interactive activity as part of this event, if we could. So for those of you in the room, roomers, which I love, and the Zoomers, I'd like to invite you, depending on your comfort level, to just maybe take a second and close your eyes, create some space in this moment, and just reflect on the craziness of the last week. The to-do lists, the early mornings, the snoozing of alarms. Yeah. And I want to now invite you to think of somebody who made a difference for you this week. Maybe you thanked them, maybe you didn't. Somebody who made your week a little bit better, a little bit easier, a little bit kinder. Us on the panel, we have the luxury of providing that service as part of our roles, but there are so many people caring for us all of the time that go unnamed. And so I'd like to give you now, if you'd like to come back to us in the room, give you an opportunity to share with either somebody around you or take an opportunity, a private moment for reflection, and think about, what did that person do? How did they make your life a little bit easier? And share that for, I think we have 3 to 5 minutes. So that'll give each person in a pair a couple minutes to share their story. And then I'll leave the coming back to the room to Vanessa and Evan. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our Zoomers for filling that chat space. I've been reading every message going up there. Love all the hearts flowing up there as well. And thank you to those of you in the room. I hope you met a friend or at least had a meaningful conversation with someone you already know. At this point, we're gonna get this panel started. So we've prepared several questions, but like I said, at the end of all this, I'm gonna open it up to all of you so that you can also ask questions of the panel. And I think if we can find our cards, it'd be nice if you could just write up your question and then pass it forward for us, just out of ease for me to vocalize it. So our first question, what is a chaplain? And why should we care that they exist?
So I'm gonna get us started, and I have a bit of an unconventional view. A lot of people will tell you that chaplaincy started with St. Martin of Tours. It's a Christian institution. And that's an okay narrative, but as someone who doesn't come from a Christian background, it's not my favorite one. So from my perspective, if we look at chaplains from a broader lens, if we look at us as care workers, you can imagine that throughout time, space, geography, culture, there have been people doing this care work in one way or another. And at Humanist Canada, we focus our chaplaincy on 4 key pillars. So we focus on chaplains providing ethical, existential, emotional, and equity-based care. And I think those 4 words, better than spirituality from my perspective, really capture basically all of the human experiences that we can go through. And you can cut them any which way, depending on sort of what the root cause is of the issue that is bringing a client to see us. So from my perspective, chaplains are really cradle to grave. That's, I don't think I've heard anyone use that terminology, but cradle to grave care workers. So we provide support from whether it's birth to death and all of the significant life milestones in between. And why should you care? Well, from my perspective, there's 3 big reasons. 1, you want to join us. So you're looking up here and you're like, oh, that's cool. I want to do that. Secondly, you want to support us. So if you want to invest in an organization like Atheists United, Humanist Canada, you want to support our individual chaplaincies, this is a great way to leave, a mark, a legacy in terms of really important care work for humanists, agnostics, atheists, freethinkers, and nuns. And lastly, of course, probably most importantly, is that you're, struggling, or you have something really exciting that you want to share with somebody, and you'd like to do it in a safe space where you know that your identity as a non-believer will be recognized and respected. Those are my thoughts. I wanted to turn it over to Elisa and see, what do you think?
I do have an elevator pitch, which because a large majority of the population doesn't know the word chaplain, or especially in Spanish, it's relatively new. And I do speak Spanish a lot in my work, and that would be capellana. And then I have to explain it's sort of like a priest, but not. And so I just tend to say I'm a clinically trained professional who provides spiritual and or religious and or emotional care. And what does that look like? It often looks like a conversation with an individual, but all of our hours of training, and I've lost track of the hours of training that I've had in clinical settings, studying psychology, education, all of that training is so that regardless of our personal beliefs, personal theologies, philosophies, we can come to the work in a non-biased place where we can suspend our own judgments. Yes, they're there. We have bias intrinsically, but in this work, our role is to suspend that and to make a safe space. And as Greg said earlier, to help people feel like they're at home in their identities in the world. So that is how I personally view my role as a chaplain. And Bill Moyer refers to 4 roles in movements of social change: organizer, advocate, rebel, and direct service provider. And when I'm asked at panels and conferences, so as a humanist, what are you fighting for? I have to say, I choose to be a direct service provider inside a prison, which operates under the Department of Adult Corrections. You're not going to see me personally outside town hall picketing with my sign if that's going to jeopardize my job and my privilege to have access into this prison and to be privy to women's conversations as they're navigating deep suffering, identity, complex questions, and I'm granted access. And if I do something to jeopardize that, goodbye, Chaplain Rosoff, I cannot access death row anymore. So I think about that a lot with what is my role personally when I am an advocate for social change and justice and equity. But we all have to figure out how we're going to embody our humanist values in the world. And that's going to differ amongst all of us. So, but that's kind of where I stand coming from the prison sector.
I wanted to build on that a little bit, Elisa, and say that I think that's really interesting in the context of a prison as an institution. And I imagine MC might have something you wanted to add to that. But in the context of the university, where I'm a volunteer on campus, unaffiliated, luxury of academia often, is that, you know, for me, this is very much an activist role. So I do provide direct services to students, but it's also about being a part of the table, being a part of the conversation in terms of university policies and procedures that are happening to ensure that, you know, atheists and other voices are integrated to how we are doing well-being on campus, because, you know, suicide or sexual violence doesn't first stop and ask you, you know, are you a believer or not when you're on campus.
Well, thank you, Srishti and Elisa. For those of you in the audience, you may have noticed we've decided to go with a more of a conversational tone for today's panel. And so not every panelist will answer every question, because I tend to think that's boring. But all of our panelists have had a chance to not only have dinner together last night, but a chance to really engage each other in some of these questions prior to coming to the room for your benefit. So these first few questions are sort of looking at the past. And so my next question will be poised towards Chaplain Berg and MC, as I'm hearing, Marie-Claire. Could you two tell us, what does humanism mean to you, and how does it inform your work as a chaplain?
So I'll begin, and I'll begin by lifting up the words of Sikivu Hutchinson, who you may have read, Atheists in the Hood. This is the book from which these words are taken. And it really represents what humanism has come to mean to me. Before I go into that a little bit, I'll read the words. Humanism can't simply dispense with gods and substitute reason and Western individualism for religion, period. In order to find the humanity in humanist practice and action, we cannot overlook or ignore vital human issues like interlocking oppression of people of color in education, in healthcare, and in housing, and in criminal justice. We must lift up and center a different humanism. And it just spoke to me because the whole book, Atheists in the Hood, but when I first became a humanist, I was running in circles that were very much white Western heteronormative humanism. Very much there's a lack of epistemic humility, of intellectual humility. We know this. It was very much about the issues of separation of church and state and being good without, which are important. But when I went back to Humanist Manifesto, the third iteration, and it talks about our ability and responsibility to support humanity, I said, that is much deeper than those things. And there are things that like, for instance, lifting up the voices of Black women and women of color, and when they're critiquing humanist ethics and morality and justice, we have to center these issues. For a while, I thought about not identifying as a humanist, but then I reconsidered because, and I won't get into that, because I thought how important it is for someone who identifies like myself to speak to others who identify like myself and not force people with marginalized identities to educate and defend their humanity, but for me to come into a place with other white heterosexual males, for instance, cisgender, and, you know, build a relationship of trust first, and then really talk about what society needs through the lens of taking care of other humans, really honestly, and imply an ethic of risk that is not often there when we're sitting around just, you know, a bunch of white people talking about humanist issues, for instance. And I'm trying, you know, I'm failing left and right, but I'm making the effort. It's better to speak knowing we won't survive. And that's sort of what humanism means to me. I won't get into it in the context of my chaplaincy right now, because we addressed that. I don't want to go too long, but what does humanism mean to you, MC?
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge before I give my definition that like humanism is a word that's been around for a really long time.
Yeah.
And that has across culture, across time, and that has been defined in very many different ways. My personal way to see humanism, I think, is in line with most of the international organizations right now, which I see it as a worldview that is deeply rooted in human dignity, in human rights, in compassion, in science, and in social responsibility. So for me, that's really what humanism is. And it empowers humans to give meaning to their own lives, you know, to find themselves, what is the meaning of their lives. And to me, it's a non-secular worldview, it's a secular worldview, so non-religious, that just promotes that respect for each human being. And how does it inform my work as a chaplain? To me, like, especially right now, there's such polarization in the world, you know, like there's so many division and hot topics that are separating us. And sometimes I feel we forget, like, we're all in this together. Like, we're all human beings, right? We have that common humanity. And the way that informs my work as a chaplain is it just really grounds me. And when I see a person ahead of, in front of me, I see what we have in common before seeing what we have as differences. And I feel really, I love my job because, as it was shared before, is that as humanist chaplains, we serve anyone that comes to see us, right? And some of them come with religious backgrounds, and we will welcome them and care for them and journey with them, because that's what it is about being a humanist. Is like, it's not about me. You know, as a chaplain, as a humanist chaplain, it's not about me. It's about you. Where are you at in your life? Where do you want to journey? And me supporting you in that journey and helping guide you to whatever you wish to explore. So that's what, to me, humanism is. It inspires me daily in my life and in my work.
You said it so eloquently, how humanism inspires your work as a chaplain. I just want that to resonate for a while. I won't repeat it because it was just so important, but I'm inspired in the same way. I am called by my children. I am called by humanity to support and meet people where they are, and through their lens of meaning making, with respect and deference as another human being.
Thank you. I'm reminded of how we've been talking about chaplaincy this whole time, and even the word chaplain is a Christian term. And a few of you sort of even spoke to how we've somehow found our way, despite many barriers to anyone who is not a Christian, into entering these spaces, into entering these roles, into being seen as legitimate. And perhaps I won't share their resumes or so forth, but most chaplains have to go through quite a bit of training education, certification, endorsing, continued education in order to even serve in these roles. And then there are the different institutional requirements that are asked of us to live up to. And so maybe some of that will come out through some of the rest of these questions, but I want you to consider really what hard work it is even to bring humanism into the field of chaplaincy. So with that, I'm going to shift a bit so we can hear from our panelists about their institutions right now that they're working at, as well as what their work looks like. And so we're going to go back to this side of the table, and I'm going to ask chaplains Marie-Claire and chaplain Elisa, how inviting has the institutions you've worked in been to you as a secular chaplain?
Yes, so listen, I didn't know what to expect when I came into the military as the first military, humanist chaplain. Very few countries have military humanist chaplains, by the way. And like I said, it was unseen in the Americas. And I was so touched because I received so many emails and messages on Facebooks, and people would track me down as I was walking like on the base to tell me, wow, this is amazing. I'm an atheist, or I'm an agnostic, or I'm a humanist. And I finally feel represented within the military Canadian chaplaincy. And it's important to understand the way it works, the military chaplaincy in Canada, is that we're assigned a unit. So each chaplain has different groups of people that they provide care to, and we care for all, right? So military members can go see any military chaplains and receive services. But it's that what was important to those members is to say, I'm represented now. They still can access support from other chaplains, but they felt seen, they felt acknowledged by that representation. And also as Armed Forces chaplain, we're specialists in our own tradition. So let's say there is a member in a certain unit who says, you know what, I want to speak specifically on humanist matters. Can I please be referred to a humanist chaplain? Well, now there's someone that they can be referred to, or if they're atheists and agnostics. Same thing that we do if someone comes to me and they want specific religious services that I can't provide, right? It's part of my role to make sure that they can access that. But yeah, it's been truly amazing how welcome I've been, and really a privilege to feel like I can represent these members. And it's been a year for me that I'm there, and when we were talking, right, you said it's been a year as well, your journey in the prison system. So how were you received?
Yes, so full disclosure, I have only ever been inside of the one prison where I work, and I'm sure all prisons have different cultures, different vibes. So I'm at the largest women's prison in North Carolina, and I have been well received. But that, we just don't know how to isolate the variables, because I don't wear anything identifying myself in the prison, especially if you're in what is called segregated housing. That is what it's called. You're happy to see another human. So any thoughts about how I identify are rarely ever even brought up. And so oftentimes, when people see me working with what are called minority faith groups, those groups who are maybe 10% or less of the population, they assume maybe I'm of that group. We have Wicca, we have Islam, we have what's called, per policy, Native American traditionalists. So those would be some of the big minority faith groups in the prison. And we were talking about this as well, that seeing a non-Christian chaplain has been like a oasis for minority faith groups. And somehow it's sort of fallen to me to lead the Wicca group and do mindfulness meditation and yoga inspired movement and all these things that people are hungry for, but simply haven't been offered, partly because of the pandemic and staff shortages. So everything I say is it's hard to really isolate, what has made me so well received. My arms are covered in tattoos. That's a great icebreaker. I mean, it's a stereotype that's true. Most people have tattoos at the prison, and we talk about that. And then once you kind of get over that front porch conversation, then you're invited into the house. That's sort of a metaphor we use in pastoral care, because it may take a while to earn someone's trust, but the more you show up, the more you're a presence, the more you look people in the eyes, they feel safe. And so I think my body language has been very inviting, and I'm a dancer as well. So I'm very conscious about what am I doing with my arms or my eyes when I'm being a presence. And chaplains, we study that, how to be aware of what your body's doing, because it can be quite a put off to be doing something that even like going, yeah, that can trigger someone who's been hit. So just these things that we're just always aware of, but it's been a positive experience in the prison, and hopefully we'll continue to diversify our staff, because as we mentioned before, I'm the only humanist chaplain inside of a prison in North Carolina. Of course, there aren't tons of people who outwardly identify as humanists, but I think the more we're in these environments, the more people will start sharing their true thoughts and beliefs.
I'm glad you shared that, how especially the minority groups felt safe to come to you to receive service, and that's so special. And it's interesting because it's what I've been noticing as well. And it's not that the Christian chaplains aren't necessarily welcoming to them. It's just that to them their perception is that a humanist chaplain would be a safer space, which I found interesting, and it's so special to be able to provide that care and to journey with them and giving them a safe space where they can just be fully who they want to be.
I know I'm not supposed to interject.
Of course you are.
But I do, just for anyone who is a prospective chaplain, I want to say it's not always so rose-colored. So it has been challenging at moments for people to receive me. I have been explicitly told, well, don't tell anyone you're an atheist. That'll scare people. And I'm like, well, I'm so grateful for that. And I'm going to continue to identify as I identify. So I think it's important to give voice to the discomfort for folks who are used to exclusively religious spaces. And I think it's really important that, as often the first people representing humanism or non-belief in these institutions, I'm the first one at the University of Ottawa, that we navigate those conversations as delicately as possible and yet still stay true to our identities. So I did want to flag, there is a lot of discomfort. A lot of people are like, what is humanism? What is chaplaincy? Why do you want to come into this space? Do non-believers have spiritual or existential crises? I'm like, of course they do. We're all human beings. So it is an important part of the background work of working with other chaplains and trying to get them comfortable with us showing up at meetings.
Yeah.
Can I say something to that as well? Yeah, exactly. We're new input into the system. So before it reaches any sort of homeostasis, it's going to go through a lot of turmoil. But my first experience, my chaplain internship, was that we were all gathered around different faith practices and those of none. And one of the chaplains said, but what we all have in common is God. The first thing.
Oops.
And the cards we left in the room said, God bless you. And so immediately I said, you have to, advocate and also identify and make yourself known. And then what I was met with, although there were challenges, was a lot of curiosity, because people just don't know. And once they realized I'm a compassionate person too, they became even more curious and more respectful.
And I don't know what your experience was, but I really appreciated your secular invocation because our meetings used to start with a prayer. So obviously, that's no longer the case, but we do have different sort of gratitude style activities that we do so that everyone has an opportunity to share in an inclusive way.
And it's so important to reframe, right? That to me, chaplaincy, it's not about God. Chaplaincy is about care. And like you shared before, Srishti, right? Around cultures and history, this role has been there. Because I've been told before, oh, well, then are you just like a social worker? Like, no, like a social worker, they do great work, but they're in their office, right? And you do their work as social worker. But chaplains, we're there, we're on the ground, we're caring for people, we're advising, we're advocating. Our role is different. And it's about care. So it's sometimes, like you say, it takes a while to kind of reframe that. But that's the thing, like university, prisons, hospital, military, people face challenges there. And that includes secular, atheists, and agnostic people. And they also deserve.
IA plus groups have similarly reclaimed words like queer. I think it's important to be able to say to my colleagues, hey, actually, I'm staying at Heretic House while I'm, presenting at this conference. And for those kinds of things to then be okay and understood that, I'm reclaiming my identity rather than it being a pejorative term that somebody else is weaponizing and making the space dangerous.
Thank you. Such a fruitful conversation. I have to interject as well because I have to admit, as much as in my own college experience, like the interfaith circles was where I've learned a lot about myself, about my atheism, about humanism. I learned what I believed hanging out with people of all traditions and no traditions. But when I got into the work of chaplaincy, I can't tell you how many times people continuously come up to me or just like, what are you doing here? And the fun thing is now I'm in the role of a deanship of religious and spiritual life, and I provide oversight for all of spiritual life here on campus. And so I'm sort of a gatekeeper for other chaplains or campus ministers who want to come onto campus. And I can't tell you how often people are surprised that I'm an atheist, right? And it throws them through a loop and it makes them have to adjust to what we're really establishing at this university, which is a place where we care for all, irrespective of the God question, right? You can come to us. And so I really do hope that we can find more humanists in these chaplaincy roles. All right, let's go ahead and shift to another question, go into the far side of the table again. Let's hear from Chaplain Srishti and Chaplain Joshua. In what ways do you address existential or spiritual concerns without invoking religious concepts? And alternatively, could you share some examples of specific ways you've helped religious and irreligious individuals find meaning, purpose, or comfort from a humanist perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vanessa. And I do want to say, thank you for being in your role because it gives people like me hope that we can actually move up in a system and one day maybe influence it. So thank you. I gave a few examples at the beginning in terms of the types of issues that clients come to see. So I'll just share once again, there are a broad range of issues that students on campus experience. So you have, everything from the 17-year-old who's drinking for the first time away from home, possibly leaving a very fundamental household, to, the mature student that is going through a whole different set of things like, an unexpected pregnancy after already having a few children and, trying to finish their doctoral studies. So there is a whole range of the human experience. As you can imagine, the campus is very much a community with its own unique sets of issues, policies, processes, etc. So I think, as I shared, Humanist Canada really focuses on the 4 E's. So our model is, again, to look at existential, ethical, emotional, and equity issues. And a sub sort of set of how we go about doing that is another set of E's. So it's looking at things like education. So, are there things that people can read or evidence around things like anxiety, et cetera, that we can integrate as part of our work? There's experience. So asking people to think about, okay, this is probably not the first time in your life that you faced a challenge or faced anxiety or had some sort of struggle with bodily autonomy. What tools do you traditionally use in order to cope with these kinds of situations? What support mechanisms do you have? Are you aware of the resources that exist on campus? And then I would say, last and probably most important E is just empathy. So like showing up as a humanist, showing up as a human being and telling people that, first and foremost, it's okay. It's okay you're having a crappy day. It's okay that that test didn't go well. It's okay that, XYZ professor sent you an email that, sent you into a space of panic. It's okay that you don't know how to navigate sexual violence, or you're struggling with your gender or your gender identity, or navigating whether you want to have sex. It's okay. It's okay that you're not sure. And I think helping people just feel like anything that they are experiencing is normal. And I really hate using that word, but that it's normal, that they're not the first person on the planet to have that emotion, is basically one of the tools that I've used as part of the work on campus. Joshua?
Yeah, so thank you. Rabbi Rochelle Robbins, who's one of our teachers, my teachers in clinical pastoral education, did rename chaplaincy as we are hermeneutical engineers, which I'm not sure, I still call myself a chaplain. But the bottom line is we're interpreting language a lot of the times, and not just, hermeneutics is literature, biblical. We're interpreting spoken language, we're interpreting somatic language, body language, things like that. In a hospital, when I come in, that is sort of what I do. If someone is speaking in religious language or religious terms, I'm interpreting what they mean. We call it a spiritual assessment. There are different protocols for that. I call it a suffering assessment or a struggle assessment. How are they struggling? How are they suffering? What are they telling me by repeating this phrase, from or this chapter of Matthew, Gospel of Matthew, or whatever they're saying? Or what are they telling me in the prayer that they're communicating with me? Or often, so it's about interpreting where they're suffering and struggling, and creating meaning that overlaps with my own meaning making. But in my setting, Children's Hospital is probably 70% Latin APAP patient population, most of whom are Catholic. And when I did my first unit of clinical pastoral education at Bowman Hospital in Detroit, I thought, I'm never going to say God, I'm never going to pray in this way. I'm going to rewrite all the language so that it's secular and this and that, and this and that. But what I realized, especially when I walked into a room and someone wanted Psalm 23 or something like that, that is the medicine that they need. If I was a doctor and came in to cure a cancer, I'm not going to give them medicine that's going to cure me. I'm going to give them medicine that's going to cure them. And in that particular moment, it is a high stress moment, high anxiety at Children's Hospital. We have a lot of high acuity patients. We have people suffering, parents suffering anticipatory grief, and all kinds of things that are just messing with you in the moment. And I need to give them the medicine they need in that moment, not the medicine I need. So oftentimes, I have prayed using the word God. I also include spirit of life, or sometimes I'll say in whatever you consider divine, whatever we all consider divine, healing energy, words like that. If someone wants a baptism, if that's what they need for their child, for instance. I can facilitate that, but oftentimes I'll ask a father to read the language that I'm a little uncomfortable reading. And not because, I mean, words are words, but because I also have, like MC said, an authority as a chaplain and a minister. And especially if there's a child there, I don't want to give my imprimatur to this religious language necessarily saying, well, that's right, because the chaplain said. So I'll say I respect everyone's faith practice. And I also, I'm rambling on here a bit, I don't go into a room, just so you know, identifying myself as a humanist or Unitarian Universalist. I say I'm a spiritual caregiver. 99% of the time, it does not come up what faith practice I am. In fact, it's a little uncomfortable. I don't want to deceive people when they assume that I'm a certain faith practice. And that's hard to navigate. And oftentimes, like in a baptism, I will say, this is not my faith practice. But in an emergency situation, as you know, anyone can offer a baptism, here's how we'll do it, type of thing, where I identify myself as not of their faith practice, but I don't go into proselytizing or talking about what I am. That's not what I'm there for. I'm there to care for the person. I will often create, rituals and tack them on to other rituals. So if we're doing a prayer, I'll also say, we give these what they call prayer blankets, and I call love blankets. And there are these blankets knit by a church nearby. So I'll say, hold on to the blanket and offer your own wish or your own blessing, pass it on to the next person. Offer some sort of ritual that, aligns with my own meaning making. I like visualizations, oftentimes chaplains will employ visualizations of, for instance, if and I'm talking a lot about children because I work at a pediatric hospital. So if a baby dies, the baby's spirit or soul is going up to God. You can see the light, you can visualize it. I will offer a visualization of the energy of the baby, the love of the baby entering and remaining in the person's heart. So it's more this way, like Rabbi Sherman Wine. I don't know if you know this, the secular humanist that Greg Epstein was talking about, built a synagogue that was flat to the earth. Because he's a humanist, not reaching up to God. And so oftentimes those visualizations, people don't recognize, don't see them as, oh, he's disparaging my religion because he's not saying to God. They just say, wow, yes, we're all sharing in this, the energy, and that baby will remain in our hearts, and we're so grateful, and it's a blessing type of thing. So, but I sort of lost track of where I was. But anyway, I also speaking of religion, I don't want to appropriate things that are not appropriate for me to use. I would never offer, for instance, a communion to a Catholic because I'm not a Catholic priest. When I do use language, I do specify that this is the language of your faith. And if you will allow me to use the language of your faith, if that's what you need in the moment, and then I'll share some language from my own faith practice. But I have become much more comfortable incorporating religion, spirituality, the medicine that the patient needs in that moment, because that is my job. And I'm more vocal as a humanist and as an atheist with the other chaplains to see that we too can be good without God, but that's not my purpose in the room. It's not even really my purpose with the other staff, because as a chaplain in the hospital, we're there to support staff through the lens of their meaning making too, not through my lens. I do have more conversations about my own spirituality or my own, about atheism or humanism or whatever with the staff than I do with the patient, than I do with, but anyway, I'll pass it on.
Actually, that made me think of a few different things. So I think the setting in this case is really, really important to consider.
Yeah.
So absolutely in a pediatric hospital, I imagine that there are a lot of acute situations that you're dealing with. At the university, I would say it's a little bit different. So oftentimes you'll have somebody who is going to a philosophy class and has heard about humanism or atheism for the first time. They're like, oh, maybe that's me. And so they will reach out to me and say, can you tell me more specifically about humanism? Can you tell me about how it gets how we could get involved, what does it mean? And so a lot of it is also providing just general literature and information on, okay, this is a governance, you can get involved, internationally, domestically, with other countries that are important to you, like, me being involved in the American Humanist Association. So there's an interesting piece of work there where there are folks who are just curious about what is humanism that reach out to me. I think the other part of the question, Vanessa, was really looking at religiosity and how do we serve those communities. And I've had a few very interesting conversations where folks are either non-religious and considering becoming religious and trying to work out, oh, do I want to go down this path, or should I sort of try one last ditch effort at becoming involved in the humanist, atheist, agnostic community before, I go down that religious path, or folks that are going through the deconversion process. So as I alluded to, oftentimes people are leaving, in some cases, kind of fundamental households and having autonomy and independence for the first time and considering what does their life look like after university. I've had many people who are like, I've become a physician now. I've spent the last 15 years just dedicated to academia, dedicated to my profession, dedicated to my discipline, to the exclusion of all else in my life. So I haven't thought about a partner. I haven't thought about children. I haven't thought about any of these other significant milestones. But now I really need to root down and figure out what my values are and go and meet somebody and maybe have children and blah, blah, blah. So I think a little bit different in the university context where there are some very specific conversations around religion, religiosity. What does that look like?
Yeah, I agree. And I have religious conversations as well, but they're with other chaplains who are ordained in their own faiths. So I'm not convincing anyone. I'm not trying to promote humanism. I mean, I am trying to promote it, not in the same way,
I only tell them when they ask. So.
Right, no, of course. But it's not what I do. It's very seldom what I do there. I want to be present. I want people to understand that I'm a humanist in the hospital, a humanist chaplain, but that's really not why I'm there. And
I think there's like you're dealing with live trauma.
Right.
Oftentimes the trauma I'm dealing with is sort of already happened. Like if it's sexual violence, it's after the party that somebody is coming to see me.
Right.
Whereas I'm not at the party where,
And we are. Oftentimes it is my job, and I feel it's my job, to be the only one who is willing to be in this space of trauma with someone else, who doesn't come in like a social worker and a psychologist or a doctor with an agenda of I have to take these notes and I have to do this. I have no agenda. I've sat with people for hours and hours and hours, barely saying anything. And I've left the room saying, thank you, that was what I needed.
it's so powerful.
It's so
Just
the
holding that
ministry
space.
of presence is all.
A ministry of presence.
And I would like to
Yes.
say that there are different, I'm sorry, just one more quick thing. There are different types of chaplaincy practices at hospital, or different type of chaplaincy departments at hospitals. Like we're an interfaith chaplaincy, so anyone from any faith can visit anyone from any other faith. Whereas at Cedars-Sinai, it's religion specific. So if there's a Jewish patient, they're going to send a Jewish chaplain. If there's a Catholic patient, they're going to send a Catholic chaplain. There is a humanist chaplain, I believe, at Cedars-Sinai. So because are you a humanist chaplain? There are many, welcome, thank you for your work. There are many people, obviously, who not only don't identify with the faith practice, but are having emotional and spiritual needs. Many people whose needs aren't being addressed. But there are also people who are humanist within religion. They don't identify that way, but oftentimes they have similar meaning making.
Thank
Anyway.
you for that. So we have about 7 minutes left before I want to open it up to the audience. And so I'm going to point this first question to you, Chaplain Marie-Claire. And then I have a question for you, Elisa, okay? So this question, Marie-Claire, says, how do you promote inclusivity and diversity within your chaplaincy work, considering the wide range of beliefs and perspectives people may hold?
So I think within the chaplaincy work, it's really just to ensure that you project that you are welcoming to anyone, right? No matter what their background is, you just want to make them feel that you can provide that safe space. And then specifically as a humanist, when it has to do with diversity and inclusion, and I would say that's not just for chaplains. I'm going to speak to all of the atheists, agnostic, and humanists here, right? I think we all have first a responsibility to educate ourselves, right? And we're so lucky in this day and age, there's so much information and great people that are out there willing to educate people coming from different places of diversity or minorities. So that's a huge piece that I think we have a responsibility to do. But then also as humanists, atheist, agnostic, secular worldviews, to show up, like show up. Those values are great that we all share, but if we don't actually take action and show up to support, you know, all of the human rights and human dignity initiatives that are happening, then are we really, you know, being humanists, right? And I think there's that action piece. So myself and my work, you know, I try to show up, like I'll be there for the Rainbow Pride Color Run. I'll be there for the diversity committees. I'll go to Eid, English Eid. This is the Muslim celebration. And I will go and I will celebrate with them. I will show up, right? And that's what I think that as humanists, we all should strive to do that, to create this space that shows, because again, I love what you were saying, right? As humanists, we're not trying to convert anyone. It's not part of what we do, right? We respect everybody's journey and where they're at. And just, we can make such a difference into diversity and minorities feeling seen just by showing up. That would be my answer.
Thank you. I'll just say, as the racialized person on this panel, one word: recruitment. I hope if you are Black, brown, identifying in any other way, you know, consider being part of this community.
We need you.
All right, our next question, and then Evan was great. He handed me 10 questions, of which I'm going to choose my top 3 from our audience. So Chaplain Elisa, and then yes, with time, others can chime in as well. If you could fast forward to 2050, that's 50, what would be your one hope for humanist chaplaincy?
As an interfaith person growing up, I had Jewish cultural heritage through my father and Episcopal heritage through my mother. My grandfather was an Episcopal priest. He worked with Martin Luther King, and just having that rich religious spiritual history left me with so many questions. And I remember in church being silent on the parts of the Nicene Creed that I didn't believe in, and then saying the parts I did believe in. And so from an early age, my family really encouraged me to be a critical thinker. I'm a Montessori kid. I was a Montessori teacher. All these concepts of, you know, explore, meet different types of people. And through that, you'll hone in on what feels right to you. And when I decided to do a summer internship, I went to seminary, Union Theological Seminary, with no vocational goals. I did a unit of clinical pastoral education in the prison reentry sector, which is very small and growing. And just, it felt right. And I said, wait, I can get paid to talk to people and like make space for trauma, and which then leads to healing. Like, and then when it came time to become endorsed, that's where it got tricky. And that's my answer to this question. I want more people to recognize that the Humanist Society, which I'm a new board member on, is a safe space for people who share the values of humanism. And if you don't need to force yourself to become, I mean, I was considering joining the Open and Affirming Baptist Church to get my chaplaincy affiliation. And I felt like, though I do agree with a lot of those values and morals, I'm also Jewish. Like, it just didn't make sense in my head. And the Humanist Society, through reading about them, interviewing them, talking to Ben, who's a prominent humanist chaplain, I felt like this is the track that will allow me to become a chaplain. And so in 2050, I hope to have spoken to a lot of people at seminaries who are like, I love this pastoral thing, but I don't know how I can be taken seriously in the field. And you do need credentials and you do need training to do this type of very serious work where you're with a lot of rules, policies, guidelines, ethics, morals, and it's like one toe out of line, you can lose your job. And so we really strive to make sure that people understand why you need to go through some of this training and why you need an endorsement, because that is a big obstacle to people. So just making it more accessible and having more diverse chaplains who are of many different backgrounds.
So my training before studying anthropology, which is like the study of the human condition, is in economics. So let's talk about money, because I think it's really important. I am a volunteer chaplain. Obviously, that is not a sustainable way to live a life. And so I'm not independently wealthy. Dad, anything that you want to tell me? So anyways, I think it's really important to keep that in mind as people consider these careers, because, at the end of it, I think we all know that in this society, care work is extremely undervalued, it's undercompensated, and, benefits, substantial incomes to actually, acknowledge the work and experience of people are really important as we look to 2050. So my hope is that we have a future where folks are actually well paid.
Agreed.
So thank you for those answers. And this first question from our Zoomers is actually very similar in that it's going to ask you how we're going to get to 2050, because it's saying, how do you think that we can move humanist chaplaincy forward as a profession and as a professional and a vocational identity?
I'm going to shout out to Atheists United, Humanist Canada, USC, everybody who's in this room, webinars, panels. I think, just information sharing within and beyond our community is an essential first step. I'm going to be quiet now for a little bit.
But that's the thing though, right? Is that we need to spread the word because it is still so unknown. But that presence, that care, like we said, has been needed through centuries and will always be needed. Will it get called something different at some point? Will we always be called chaplains, or maybe that term will evolve, but that need is always going to be there. And it's important to have representation from humanist, atheist, agnostic chaplains there for when some members may need some specific care that we can provide. Who knows, maybe in 2050, there will be many more of us in the front here at the panel sharing about humanist chaplains.
And one way I've been successful is being around a lot of interns, and they're trying to have a mentor in their life. And I give out my phone number, like, if you have any questions at all, just ask me about what this humanist thing is, because I know you're in a place of discernment. And I just want to normalize it, that you can be you on the job and don't feel like you have to choose something just for the sake of that piece of paper. So students, catching them early.
All right, these next two I think might be a bit easier question. But you are all visionaries for doing the work you do. So I appreciate you taking on those tough ones. Well, here's one. We already heard about hermeneutical engineers. Are there any other non-Christian alternatives to the word chaplain? Like, what are y'all using in your context?
I've heard like different like titles or name positions being used. I go by chaplain right now because it's the official term in the armed forces. I've heard spiritual care provider, and I've heard all kinds of. I've heard wellness provider, and all that. It's very hard though to find a term that, because I don't know if we'll always use the term chaplain as we continue to evolve, but it's hard to find a term that is all encompassing of what we do, don't you find?
It's an ongoing conversation. The administrator at Children's Hospital, who is United Church of Christ, is like next to you as far as a very progressive, open-minded community, has been thinking about it and discussing it with our board for quite a while. And they're just, right now, they haven't come up with a good universal replacement for chaplain.
I've heard well-being officer.
Yeah,
That's
I like that.
one I'm not opposed to.
Yeah, I like that.
Unlike spiritual caregiver.
Yeah.
That's already not clear. But I really like this idea. I'm curious in terms of hands, how many people have heard of the word liminal? Okay, good, awesome. I'm not the only one. I really like the idea of like liminal caregiver or something, because so the idea of liminality is people who are, navigating between spaces, and that's, between being a student and having a job, between being employed and unemployed. There's this liminal thing. There's this like chemistry with that word that I really like, that I think would be handy, but I know it's not necessarily a word du jour.
And it's interesting. And that's the thing, then if you find a good word in English, then you got to think diversity and across languages as well, right? So.
I saw one in the chat said existential counselor.
Yeah,
Okay,
love it.
I love that.
Love it.
It's a long word. It'll be hard to spell, but.
And part of my job is I have to come into the room and give them a sense of what I'm doing and why I'm there relatively quickly. I don't have time for an elevator speech. So, even though not everyone associates chaplain with, the same meaning, and of course in Spanish, it's very different. It gives them some sense. If I come in and say, I'm a liminal caregiver, which wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in a hospital setting. They could be more scared. The fact of the matter is, sometimes I have had people scream in fear when I came in with the word chaplain, because they think I'm the angel of death coming into the room. So we do need another title, but I need to be able to communicate right away why I'm there, what I'm doing, to go into that building that relationship and providing that compassionate support.
Yeah, and then in chaplain, I also have people who are non-religious saying, no, I don't want to speak to a chaplain.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can get all these
They
reactions.
assume you're Christian, assume you're religious.
I often define my job through acting. So when like titles and words just don't mean anything, well, I show up and I'm like, how is your family? Do you need any water? They're the tissues. I mean, that's like what we embody. And sometimes
Right.
all the semantics, like, so I struggled with that early on, and now I'm just like, I'm a chaplain. So it's one of those very interesting things.
I agree. When I come in, I'll often say, that's a lovely, your child's name. Where did that come from? What's the history of that name? Or you have that beautiful tattoo on your arm. What is there a meaning to that? Something completely different.
Yeah.
I did want to have just a little shout out. So I went to visit my family in India when my grandfather died just a couple of weeks ago. And I was trying to explain this panel. And chaplain is not a word in Hindi that was at all accessible to my grandmother, for example. So I used Nastik Pandit. So Nastik means non-religious, and my family is Brahmin, so they understood this idea of what is a Pandit, and a Pandit is someone who is knowledgeable in the Hindu context around, ways of living. And in the Hindu context, it's not necessarily around religiosity. And so that was a term that I had to sort of coin on the spot to give a different context.
All right, maybe for this one, maybe just one or two of you could tell me or give us an example of a non-religious rite or ritual that you facilitate.
I will speak to something that's very unique in the chaplaincy setting of prison ministry, and that is crochet arts. And for those of you who aren't seeing, it is a quilt that has been crocheted with many different colored squares. And so that actually was a chaplaincy sponsored project, and it's a ritual for those involved to explore their life stories through making meaning out of the different colors, the numbers of squares. A black ribbon is the death of a loved one while incarceration. A red ribbon, for example, is HIV/AIDS survivor. And so the number of squares is how many years a person has been incarcerated. And so the act of putting that into crochet arts, which was started by my mentor and supervisor, Chaplain Job, that is a very inclusive ritual, because a person is making meaning out of their life in their own way, but using what's available. Yarn is considered safe if you have permission, and a 3-inch plastic crochet hook. So being creative, and I'm sure all of us have had those experiences where with what you have at this time and place, what can you do to create a ritual? And it can be stillness and silence, or it can be an elaborate arts project, or you name it.
A ritual, someone else can go because I just lost my thought.
Don't worry, we'll all be the last word too.
Yeah. I've done all sorts, so, I got an email the other day of somebody who found me on the university website and is getting married on campus and would like a humanist to be part of their ceremony. So, weddings, dealing a lot with gender issues. So helping people celebrate the end of sort of a past identity and a new name as part of, and I think my favorite was an art project. It was a family sort of reunification, and we did finger painting, excuse me, where everyone made a family tree with their handprints. So that was kind of fun.
I remember at the, the Humanist Society does a number of non-religious rituals. I'm not on the board anymore. So I was on the board, but, like translating, like, something like that, and at weddings all the time. In the air, and we talked about light refracting through crystals and sharing beauty and all this other stuff. It was a bespoke ritual, and a lot of times you can create a bespoke ritual if you have a relationship with someone and understand what is meaningful for them and to them.
And that's the thing, as Humanist Chaplain, we have so much flexibility to create rituals because we're not stuck within certain dogmas or rules. Recently, I was contacted by someone who didn't live close to me, but they were a military member and they wanted something to help them have a ritual following 2 miscarriage, right? And that's the thing, as Humanist Chaplain, based on what the person tells us their experience, we're able to create that for them. And that's not always available through other traditions, right? So I find that's really powerful to be able to find this for them.
And we have a child life department in the hospital who does things like memory making when a baby dies with the siblings and with the family. That's a ritual.
I had one where there were a couple that their parents were opposed to their union and from different religious traditions. And they fell in love at a pancake shop. So we all ate pancakes together as part of celebrating their love.
So we're artists, we're ritualists, we're creators, we're all of these things added to our title. All right, in our last few minutes, we need a call to action. So I'd love to hear from each of you, and not to put you on the spot, but you're the closest to me. And we'll go just right down the row. What's your call to action? What do you want our audience to take away?
Help us spread the word, like this is a thing, it's happening, and hopefully it will expand as we go. It's not an easy journey. So for interested candidate with the Canadian military humanist chaplains, it's quite difficult. And I know in the US, there's been candidates trying, but they haven't been able to make it a reality yet. But it will happen. We're having dedicated people that, push and make it happen. So hopefully if we all commit ourselves to this, one day it will happen. No one thought it would happen in Canada, and here I am, right?
My call to action specifically from the prison and prison reentry sector is to raise awareness about the realities of incarceration in this country and the many barriers people face upon release as they re-enter their communities. And 95% of women in prison will be released one day. And that's why I care. And I care because our society has tended toward not caring, to be perfectly honest. And so being someone who can provide emotional support and just make space, my call to action is that everyone who maybe you came here with your activist hat on and not necessarily to pursue chaplaincy, looks into what's happening in our prisons and what happens when people return to society.
Beautiful. I'm forgetting the exact quote, but my favorite graffiti artist said something like, people who care to make the world different are the most dangerous. And so that would be my one word to you: care. And with your caring, agitate. So make donations, volunteer your time, speak out, lobby your politician, whatever it is, care and use that caring to agitate wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Question, challenge your own assumptions. Believe people when they tell you their truth. And in that way, you can build a trusting relationship where you can mutually listen to each other, and humanism can spread, in that way. And finally, I'm going to use a word that we argue about this in our chaplaincy cohort all the time, whether we love people or not, whether that's appropriate. Love people.
Beautiful. Well, with that, we've come to our close. I want to thank all of those on Zoom. I'm realizing from Australia to the Netherlands, from the coast to coast of the United States and Canada and everyone else, hopefully my friends and family in Guam and the Philippines. I want to thank you and all of you here in this room. I want to thank our sponsors again, of course, Humanist Canada, the Humanist Society, and of course, Atheists United for coming to USC and asking us to hang out. So glad to be a co-sponsor on behalf of USC's Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. Thank you, everyone, and thank you especially to our esteemed panelists for sharing their stories with us today. One last thought for those of you online, please hang out with Chaplain Anthony Cruz Patojas. He will be happy to facilitate a conversation in the chat. And you can ask him some tough questions too. It will be a truly happy hour virtually. And for those in the room, please join us in crossing the street and enjoying some snacks and beverages. See you over there. Bye.
Yeah, well done, everyone. Very good job.